Good evening. In case you don't know where you are, I have a map up on the screen. People tend to be confused in this day and age. That's a little annoying. There we go. Yeah. I like to start with limericks. There was a mad preacher in Moscow, way up north there in Idaho. He invited me here. Why is not clear. I'm dispensationalist, doesn't he know? I kind of got in trouble last time I did that because I had the former president of Masters, John MacArthur, come to speak at an ACCS. I think he did the opening plenary, I did the closing one. And after he had safely left town, I had a good MacArthur limerick. You want to hear it? There once was a preacher, J. Mack, whose rhetorical skills were not slack. He caused much consternation with his dispensations. It's enough to bring R.C. Sproul back. Somebody reported that, I had to go to the principal's office and all that. So a year ago at Masters University, we invited Carl Trueman to come in and do a talk on his book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, which I highly recommend that you read. It's a bit of a plow, it's kind of long, but it's very, very good. And it starts off with a question, so how did we get to the point where a man can say to another person or group of people, hey, I used to be a man, but now I'm a woman, and everyone's like, oh, that's cool. And it deals with the rise, really, of transgenderism, which is really one symptom of the complete insanity of the modern world, which you may have noticed. And he makes an argument kind of from intellectual history, and I talked with Carl a lot about it, and we had some good, interesting conversations. And, I told him where he was wrong. He told me where I was wrong. That's what academic types do. And I have a little bit different approach. We start at the same place, and we end in the same place, but we kind of get there with different things. And I've been kind of thinking about this for a while because even though I'm a Renaissance scholar and a Reformation historical theology scholar, I kind of consider myself more of a culture watcher than anything else. I'm interested in contemporary culture and the arc of culture and history. And so I come at things from a little bit different of a background. So Carl is arguing from like a historical position, looking at the Romantic poets and Nietzsche and Freud and some other stuff. And it's good. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. I really, really wish I had written it. I read it. I was like, man, I wish I wrote that. I would have done so much better. Anyways, he scooped that one and, struck while the iron was hot and things like that. But in case you haven't noticed, the world has gone completely crazy in a very brief period of time. For instance, in libraries all over, George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984 has recently been moved to the nonfiction section. And people are looking around wondering, what in the world is going on? Whether you're a far right person or even a far left person, the far left person is like, how can people still be on the far right? What's wrong with them? And, and then the libertarians in the middle, the people are like, I don't know what to think. And it's just, now, here's what's happening. You're simply witnessing the unfurling, the unwinding of a tightly wound package of lunacy, psychosis, pathology, confusion, and at the root, rebellion against God, in whose image we are made, both materially and immaterially. Our bodies and our non-material part image God. And in the fallen state, after the garden, our natural condition is that we hate the image of God that we bear. We hate the image of God that we bear. And we are constantly busy trying to erase and eradicate and efface and obliterate and remove and forget the image of God in us. Because when you're fallen, you are born in the state of enmity against God. You hate him. That is your natural state. And when you carry around the image of someone you hate in you, you want to erase it. Humanity corporately and humans individually is/are not now suddenly and never will be changing our nature or altering our identity or beginning to inhabit our authentic self after some sort of transition from a previous false existence. If you depend on pronouns, unsuitable hormones, and scalpels to make a supposed transition from what you are to what you are not, you will have my pity, but not my cooperation. There's a significant difference between transmutation and transmutilation. A moth transmutes into a butterfly because that is its nature. It is designed to do so. The very fact that chemical and surgical mutilation is required to make a woman a trans man shows its unnaturality and ultimately its falsity. Now, the supposedly materialist basis of modern thought after the invention of science by Sir Francis Bacon in the 17th century and after the Darwinian theories of evolution and the Marxian descriptions of history and economic relations and the Freudian concepts of the self, nowadays what most people in the world think, if they read, if they have access to the internet, if they watch television, movies, read newspapers, magazines, websites, for the vast majority of people, they do not think beyond this structure of ideas that the material is the prime reality. I mean, you can see it, you can knock it, you can trip over it, you can eat it, you can drink it. You seem to be made out of matter. That is the material is the prime reality. That's what everybody thinks, right? Now, matter is real, the material is real, this is part of God's design, but that's not all there is. But people who do not know God believe that the material reality is the prime reality, and therefore the transgender community has a tremendous philosophical and linguistic problem with the idea of a biological male claiming status as a female. I think that the way that people who do not support the trans thing are arguing against it is very often wrong. It's clearly ineffective. You have XX, everyone in this room has either XX or XY chromosomes built into every cell of your body. You have a full blueprint of your sex advertised like a billboard at the molecular level in every cubic centimeter of your body. Trillions and trillions and trillions of these genetic markers that mark your sex. Even as your male tongue says you are a woman, the bits of matter of which your tongue is constituted proclaims your confusion. You're arguing against your own blueprint. To say that your sense of self, your gender identity, as it is popularly called, and that's what I'm going to attack mercilessly tonight, to say that your sense of self, your gender identity, is in fact detached from your chromosomal set, that your body is female but your consciousness is male, that somehow a mistake has occurred in the relationship between your biological structure and your conscious identity, is in fact an anti-materialist position. It makes no sense to use their own language against them. Your argument self-deconstructs. Doesn't work. This is why people get angry when you respond like this. It's actually, making that kind of a statement is actually a lot closer to a religious statement than a biological statement or even a philosophical statement. It's a sense, it's a feeling, and I don't think that belief in God is just a sense or a feeling, but it is those things to some extent. Maybe it's even a hope. Right? They hope they can be a man. They hope they can be a woman. It's an act of faith, we might say. It's a belief. And so some of the deepest questions of philosophy, the relationship between being and thinking, what philosophers would call ontology and epistemology, being, what really is, and epistemology, what can you know and how can you know it? And then what Descartes starts to call the mind-body duality back in the 16th century, and what high-end neurobiologists at the top universities in the world call the hard problem of the material biological basis of consciousness. How can stuff know that it is? How come I know that I am, but the wood does not? How does that work? And how can stuff be aware of itself? How can it become aware of itself? Right? And all of these questions are now being handled and decided by 16-year-olds with TikTok accounts. This is not to say that intellectual leaders in the universities are uninvolved. In many ways, they've laid the intellectual groundwork for the movement, which has grown explosively due to the accelerant of social media. It's like throwing gas on a fire. Most of these trans views on TikToks have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views. Some people who have done the stats say that the total number of views of all these videos is in the billions, which means many people are consuming this stuff the way you eat good salty French fries when you're really hungry. They're just consuming and consuming and consuming. Why is it that we have, as human beings, so much interest in the question of what we are? Why? That's because the ultimate question, the greatest question that a man can ask or a woman can ask is, what am I? It's the interrogative version of Jesus' I am. Jesus says, I am. We say, what am I? What am I? What sort of thing am I? I don't think rocks try to contemplate their nature. Yeah, I'm igneous. Oh, I'm sedimentary, metamorphic. No, I don't think that's happening. But human beings are desperately curious. You find it in literature, in art, philosophy, and science. What am I? Well, you ask a question like that when you are already unmoored, you will drift. And every wind of doctrine will blow you around. So I want to talk with you tonight about what I call, see if I can get my aim good. I was shooting a really nice pistol yesterday just because I was in Idaho and I'm allowed to. In Los Angeles, we don't have the police have guns because someone might get hurt. Let's see, that's on. And I was pushing backwards. Okay, that's good. That's the story of my whole life. You don't want to. There you go. I was pushing reverse. I want to talk with you about the transgenda and the non-identity of identity. Everything hinges on this term, identity. But no one talks about what do we mean by that? Yeah, do you have your ID? Can I see your passport? I identify as, whatever it may be, right? The entire thing hinges on the term identity. And I want to try and encourage you to think through this as what I call the metamorphic identity industrial complex. I didn't need a fancy title, but I went to graduate school for a long time, so they trained me to give titles that no one understood. You got to understand, now it's just a business. It's big money in it. It's just a business. But just because it's demonic doesn't mean it's not economic. It's big business. But where does it come from, right? And so I want to try and help you think through what I call the mythopoetics, another fancy graduate level term, the mythopoetics of swarm thing. People think in swarms. It's like, you ever coach soccer for 5-year-olds? All right, you got positions. You got a goalie, you got the fullbacks, you got the halfbacks, and they don't listen. They just all follow the ball. It's like little hives, little swarms of kids running around. No, stay in position, right? What happens is we now have people who are unable to think outside the box. These are the kind of people like, I'm totally unique like everybody else, right? And everyone just moves in swarm think, right? And mythopoetics is a fancy way of saying making stuff. So people think that if they follow the thinking swarm, that they can make whatever you want, create your own reality. This is my truth. That is the most ridiculous statement I've ever, well, there's a lot of, it's probably overdoing it. There's a lot of ridiculous statements out there, right? So what do? I know people, I know strong, solid, godly Christian people whose kids came to them, 12, 13, 19, 25, whatever age, I'm trans now. What do? I found a guy on some chat board who was talking about this. He said, my daughter came to me last night, said she's trans, she's in 9th grade. What do I do? So I looked her in the eye and said, sweetie, I'm so glad I can finally tell you. I'm trans too. She looks at me confused. No, Dad, you're not. I said, stop being a bigot. You don't know what my reality is. I'm trans. Now I can come out to you. Next morning, I put her and my wife in the van. I had on a really pretty floral print dress and some big clunky clogs, right? I did my makeup really nice, okay? And my daughter is in the car, very angry, tells me to stop faking. I tell her, you need to believe and accept and celebrate my reality. I'm trans, honey. Let's get in the car and go to school. She wants to be dropped off a block before school. I drive right to the front, walk through all of her friends, go to the front desk and say hi. Everyone comments on my shoes. My daughter is fuming. My wife's back in the minivan. She cannot stop laughing. She's crying so hard, right? In the afternoon, I've changed my outfit. I show up to pick up my daughter, right? I've got a cute little black leather mini skirt. I got some fishnets on. I got a giant pink wig. I got a little book to read to little kids, right? So I walk in there and I walk up to all of her friends, right? And I tell them, hi, I'm her mommy now. She freaks out, goes home and decides she's no longer trans. It is amazing how cool things are until your parents start doing them, right? Look, at a certain point, mockery is absolutely appropriate. There's a long Christian tradition of it, right? At another point, it's nearly mandatory. I mean, it is a target-rich environment, right? So you would think that the experts in the world, like psychology today, they understand people, would put up something like this. Identity encompasses the memory. So they're going to give us a definition of identity, because that's the key word. Identity encompasses the memories, experiences, relationships, and values that create one's sense of self. Did they tell you what identity was? No, they talk about your sense of self and your memories. So they didn't really say anything, but that's typical of psychology today. This amalgamation, nice word, my kind of word, creates a steady sense of who one is over time. It's just a steady sense of, I know a lot of people who do not have a steady sense of who they are at all, but that's another lecture. Even as the new facets are developed and incorporated into one's identity, would any of you like to diagram that sentence? Or look at the logical, rhetorical structure? They are saying nothing at all because there's nothing to say. I want to suggest to you tonight that the very idea of identity as currently thought is not real. It's not real. As a matter of fact, I would say that identity and the idea of the transformation of identity change constitutes the new idolatry. It constitutes the new idolatry. Now that my introduction is complete, I do like a 35-minute introduction, a 5-minute lecture. That's just how I do things, okay? My talk really has two parts. First the bomb, then the shrapnel. Identity change constitutes the new idolatry. There's a sociologist, brilliant guy, Philip Reif. He kind of wrote a lot of books on the history of psychotherapy. He's a scholar of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and all those guys. And he wrote this very strange little book in 2006, I think shortly before he died. He was actually married to Susan Sontag, who was one of the leading, very, very left-wing very liberal feminists in the 70s. That's not why he died, by the way, but he was married to Susan Sontag for a long time. This popped into my head. And he wrote this weird little book called My Life Among the Deathworks. It's very hard to read and very, very weird. But he floated this idea even earlier than that identity change, changing what you are, not, your political party or changing the color of your hair or the size of your pants, that identity change was a new idolatry. This is in 2006, right? What I think is going on here is this. The very concept, and he was not a believer, by the way, the very concept of identity itself, as we normally think of it, is a false construct. It's not biblical. It's secular, it's psychologized, it's imaginary, it's part of the kind of modernist psychological structure as people think of themselves now, usually in post-Freudian terms. It's often seen as an invention of the Renaissance. The Renaissance scholars were fascinated with this Latin word individuus, that which cannot be divided. I'm an individual. And they began to think of themselves as individual agents instead of just part of the mass of humanity in the Middle Ages. That's kind of a typical thing that Renaissance scholars like to say. But there is nothing that I have seen in either ancient literature or philosophy or even theology along the lines of the modern concept of what we now think of as personal, individual identity. They would look at this and go, what are you, crazy? It's so strange that right now you're thinking that about what is he talking about? We'll get there. That's the shrapnel part, right? The idea of self-awareness, certainly, you're going to see in St. Augustine, who really kind of writes the first spiritual autobiography. But the Romans, for example, talked of their persona, where you get the word person and personality and so on and so forth, as who they were. But that was also their word for a theatrical mask. They didn't think that there was some identity which you could shift like a recipe. The concept was utterly foreign. It's a very new thing, in a sense. Of course, there's nothing new under the sun. Please note, I did not just say that you do not exist. That's not what I said when I said there's no such thing as identity. I didn't say there's no you, okay? That's for graduate school philosophy seminars where they say, thank you for your tuition dollars. By the way, you don't exist. And then they go to lunch, right? I said that your concept, what you've always heard of, possessing a thing, holding on to a thing, something you could put in a box, put on a shelf, a thing that is an identity, right? And perhaps therefore a you that you can change or exchange for some other different you is an unexamined philosophical linguistic construct that you have been taught by your culture. It's not in the Bible. Again, I'm not saying you don't exist. I mean, some of you may not exist. I don't have very good eyesight. I'm not saying that there is no you. What I'm saying is it's that you are confused about the nature of your you-ness, unless you're grounded in what the Bible says about humanity. The problem for fallen people is that they do not by nature know what they are. They don't know what they are. And this includes believers until you are converted and until you mature and find out what and who you are. In other words, identity has no identity. It doesn't. Pin someone down. What do you mean by I identify? What does that mean? What do you mean by identity? Right? I mean, it actually goes back to Latin. If you've ever done a little, scholarly paper in school or something like that, and you had to cite a source, but you cited it several times, you would put ibid, right? And that goes back to the same root. It ultimately means the same as. So what are you? I have an identity. That means you just said I am the same as what I am. That makes no sense. That's like Popeye, I am what I am, right? That's a cartoon for a sixth grader. There's no thoughtful sophistication to that at all. Rather than, it's a lot like Los Angeles. There's no there. I keep trying to find Los Angeles. I've been living in LA County for almost a quarter century, and there's kind of nothing there, even though there's millions of people. You know that 1 out of 26 people in America lives in my county? It's weird. Yeah, and it's the cultural production capital of the planet, and that's really scary. My wife and I, we love Thai food, and we'll go down to West Hollywood, a favorite Thai restaurant. She's like, we're the only guy and girl couple in here. I'm like, yeah, it's West Hollywood. These are the people that are making the culture. And she's like, oh no, look, there's this really nice dad out with his son. No. I love how innocent you are. Rather than possessing a thing called an identity, which you can change and exchange like it's some kind of commodity, you are the image bearer of God. Now, I know that that's a thing, but it's not what we think of as our identity. Or I'm an American, or I'm a Republican, or I'm a this, or I'm from Arkansas, or whatever it is. That's not how it works. You are the image bearer of God under his continual sovereign providential disposition, rule, and care. You are designed to be a mirror, a reflection, a copy of God's attributes without being God yourself. Your function is to reflect his glory back to him. Not to be an entity unto yourself, to have your own identity and switch it around. He who finds his life what? Loses it. But he who loses it. The harder you try to create an identity, the less likely you'll ever get one. Human beings are image bearers and perhaps best understood as consisting of two elements. This is pretty basic, right? The body and the mind. I'm not going to get into the bipartite, tripartite theology. That's not what I'm talking about here. But think about this. Your body does not change its essential nature. Some of you have known me for a long time are like, you've changed. You kind of walk like this now, Your hair's all gone. The body never changes its essential nature. The blueprint is in every cell. It does degrade due to sin. I was at the deathbed of a guy who was a mentor of mine, Dr. C.W. Smith, Greek professor for 54 years. And one of the last things he said was, my sin is killing me. And I'd never seen that guy going around committing sins. I mean, I'm sure he had, but yeah. The sin ultimately catches up to and degrades us. But it is, your body is not your identity. Go around saying that in Los Angeles and find out how quickly you lose all your friends. If your body was your identity, your you would cease to exist at death, which is what the pagans generally think, isn't it? That's just it. Now, the non-material part of the you, that is a you, but isn't an identity, the mind, the consciousness, the soul, whatever you want to call it, is actually malleable. It can change in a way that your body does not. Now, of course, bodies do change, and minds, I changed my mind. But I'm talking about two very different changes at the level of what they are, the essence, what you might call their identity, if I was going to let you use that word. Your mind, your consciousness, your soul is actually malleable. It's changeable, both before and after conversion. You can change your mind, all right? Okay. Or you can have your entire soul reborn and renewed when you are brought by God's sovereign will into faith. That's known as conversion, right? The greatest change ever is the ontological reversal at the core of your being, known as conversion. Conversion is everything, and that's a real change. That's a real change. And God does a lot of cleanup afterwards called sanctification, which is usually painful when you're dealing with it. But conversion is not changing your mind and being convinced by new information. It is rather becoming a new creature through a sovereign act of God. After conversion, many changes occur as part of the sanctification process. But notice, the new creature is spiritual and immaterial consciousness. It's a new you. You don't get a new or changed body at conversion. That comes at glorification, right? If you wish to think of yourself as having an identity, believe me, this is coming back to the trans thing. I know that's why you really came, right? If you wish to think of yourself as having an identity, a you that you somehow possess like an object, then that identity is only and entirely grounded in being the imago Dei, and specifically in your identity in Christ, all in all, not I, but Christ dwells in me. Did you ever think about that? Lay down tonight and think, not I, but Christ dwells in me. You won't go to sleep. Maybe for days. How can I not dwell in myself? What are you? What are you? Do you know what you are? Do I know what I am? A trans feeling, and I know a number of them. It's a feeling, it's a sense. A trans feeling is a desire for an object. What object do they desire? A differentiated body. They desire an object, a differentiated body. The current body is viewed by the conscious mind as an error. I'm trapped in the wrong body, and a new exterior and physical body will be the cure. It's an idealized object of desire that you believe will eventually, finally map accurately onto the conscious identity which is perceived by the self as the self, right? The phrase is, I was born in the wrong body. Do you get that set of transy things going? And problem solved, I feel at home now, right? But the driving force is always a desire. And the desire is always for something understood as an object, a thing you want to get and be and change into. You can have no desire for a particular object. I have no desire for Brussels sprouts. Drives my wife crazy. I have no desire for Brussels sprouts. I love broccoli. No desire for Brussels sprouts. But you can't desire a nothing. See the distinction? You can't desire nothing. What do you want? Not, I don't want anything, I want a nothing. What's a nothing? There's nothing there. There's no there. This weird, widespread conception of possessing an identity that can be changed at will has rapidly expanded in recent years due to what I call the metamorphic identity industrial complex. I'm anorexic. You go to the doctor, I'm anorexic. I need to lose weight. Cut off my arm. The doctor's like, no, you need help. I'm not gonna cut off your arm to help you lose weight. Right? Or a guy goes into the doctor, Feel like a pirate. Cut off my leg and give me a peg. Cut off my arm and give me a hook. Poke my eye out and give me a patch. I want to be a pirate. No, you need help. I'm not going to mutilate you. Right? I'm a man trapped in a woman's body. Family audience, so we'll stop there. The doctor says, okay, that'll be $100,000. It's a business. It's demonic and economic. I used to be a man trapped in a woman's body. Then I was born. I got over it. It was okay. Right? But the mass media, especially all the visual material that's flying at you out of your phones and screens and so on and so forth, as well as the politics, the business, the entertainment, the entire culture generally has suddenly unleashed a tidal wave of pressure regarding transgenderism. All of us feel it. It's perfectly acceptable, preferable even, to use social media to post about your transition from male to female, but you will be blocked, canceled if you detransition after you realize you made a mistake. No one gets blocked faster than, apparently it's a one-way street. But what if you transition, then you detransition, but then you de-detransition? What about that? You're going to be canceled, you're going to be doxxed, you're going to be called a hater and a bigot and a transphobe. And, if you even oppose giving puberty blockers to children, or if you speak out against teaching gender fluidity to third graders and permanently mutilating teenage boys and girls, you're a hater. It's insane. And that's the charitable word. It's an industry. It's a complex. And it's about changing something that isn't there to be changed in the first place. It's a complex because it has a lot of parts and moving system, right? It's working very effectively right now. It's industrial metaphorically because it works like a factory, effectively building minds that are programmed to uncritically accept every possible thing presented as true because someone claims that their feelings are their truth and their reality and must be received with submission followed by celebration. It can never just be accept me. It's accept me, I get everything that I want, and now you have to celebrate me. Thus, drag queen story hour. You ever notice that the drag queen readers never want to go read stories in the old folks' homes? That'll keep you up at night too. And I call it the metamorphic identity complex, industrial complex, because the central trope, the whole main figure of speech, the presented truth is that you can change, you can metamorphose your entire identity, specifically your maleness or femaleness, to its opposite or even to something else, non-binary, gender queer, furry, two-souled, minor attracted, transhuman, whatever, anything you want. This is why the fashionable, trendy movement of changing your identity like you change your house or your pants or your hair color is ultimately idolatry. It's a form of false worship, right? And that's why, and you can find this everywhere on the internet from people who are doing the research, because people are researching it, right? That social media is an unbelievable accelerant. In liberal arts colleges in America right now, 30 to 40% of people are identifying as LGBTQ, which means another generation, we're not even going to be here. Or at least they won't be here, right? Everybody knows about Leah Thompson. Do you know about the retouch photos? Right? They pulled this left-hand photo down and they put this nice Photoshop, very smooth-faced version, right? Because everyone knows when a girl comes out of the water, she doesn't have goggle marks on her eyes or water droplets on her face. You know where this comes from? It comes from a lack of understanding of real beauty and a hatred of it, because beauty always points to God. And our sense of beauty points to God. It points to God. That's the introduction. I'm almost done. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold or suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shown it unto them. You have God written in your heart like you have male or female written in the code, the material code of DNA and chromosomes in every cell of your body. You are your own walking blueprint. And that blueprint always points to the architect, and that architect is God. That which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him, for the creation of the world, are clearly seen. Did you ever notice how the Bible just seems a little crazy to you as a human? The invisible things are clearly seen. Does that make sense? Yes. The things of God which are invisible are in fact clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imagination. They became empty in their thinking, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up, and this goes down to verse 32. He gave them up, and they just self-degrade and self-degrade and self-degrade and self-degrade. But that idea that God has built his image into you and shown you the secret and invisible things of what it means to be a human, which is an image bearer of God. The great question that the theologians and the philosophers in the ancient world were always wrestling with, quid est homo? What is man? What is a man? It's Psalm 8, right? It's Hamlet. What is a man? What is a man? What is a human? What does it mean to be human? And because we all know that we bear that image, but we all know that we are at enmity with God, we are always, always, always desperately trying to erase and efface and obliterate and eradicate and forget that we carry our own judgment inside of us. So God gave them up, and he keeps giving them up. God's law, his rule, his ordering, and his disposition of the universe, his beautiful design in humanity. What is more beautiful than a human? What is more beautiful than a woman, than a man, than a child? Name it. Nothing. His design, his beautiful design in humanity as male and female, making more humans, printing off, as it were, more images of God and going forth and subduing and populating the earth with a reflective image of himself in all humans. He called very good, and it will not be mocked. His created order is what Calvin calls the theatrum gloria, the theater of his glory. It's the theater of his glory. The people who have been swept up, you must pity them, in the transmania, have embraced what the ancient Greeks used to make fun of and called oikophobia. It's a hatred or a dislike of one's own cultural home. Oikophobia. Oh, you're from Macedonia. Yeah, but I hate Macedonia, Macedonian people, Macedonian women. I don't like Macedonian food. I wish I was a Theban. It's oikophobia. You have a phobia and a fear and a hatred of your own home. What is more evident of self-hatred and the desire to erase God's beautiful image in you than by mutilating your body based on what you feel here? Being called a transphobe is one of the least effective insults I can imagine. I am not afraid of men in skirts. As a matter of fact, my family are all Scotch Highland. My grandmother came on a boat a generation ago. My ancestors, right, I come from a long line of manly, mean, redneck Scotchmen wearing skirts, running down the hill, throwing rocks at the English after having spent all night sipping this odd concoction of barley and water. I am not afraid of dudes in skirts. My wife, I was speaking at a conference in Denver like 2-3 weeks ago, and my wife had never been to Boulder, and I thought I would take her there because I would watch her reaction to all the crazy leftists there, and it was pretty entertaining. And, I just wanted to comment on these two dudes that were walking in these nice dresses. Like, dude, that's not fitting your hips. You should go a little bit lower. I didn't. But see, the imago Dei in you can never, ever, ever be erased. Calvin talks about this in detail in Book 1 and Book 2, particularly of the 1559 final edition of the Institutes, right? Human beings are desperate to erase the imago in them, but he says it can never be effaced. It's like lines that are chiseled into granite, so deep that the chiseling of the letters gets whiter the deeper it goes back. And the more you scrub that granite to get rid of the message, the bigger the letters are. The harder you try and erase the image in you, the clearer it becomes. Every trans person still bears the image of God. They are suffering mental health issues and spiritual pathologies, and you may or may not know this, but their attempt rate and succeed rate at suicide is the same before and after all the different kind of trans levels. Did you know that? It's kind of terrifying. You've probably seen these signs. Trans people will not be erased. I'm not anti-trans people. I'm anti-sin in myself and in others. But this fear, you will not erase us. I'm not the guy with the eraser. You are. But the horrible, terrible, and beautiful irony is, you're not just trying to erase yourself. You're erasing yourself because you're trying to erase the image of God in you. See, the trans community understands at a root level, right out of Romans 1, that they have a deep need, watch this, to stop being who they perceive themselves to be. They're like, there's something wrong, I've got to change. Right general direction. There's something wrong, it needs to change radically. Total change. They understand at a root level that they have a deep need to stop being who they perceive themselves to be and need to be converted to something else. Right sentiment, wrong target. Instead of changing, and you notice I won't use the word gender, not in public. Doesn't exist, it's not real. Linguistic construct comes out of graduate schools. Ignore almost everything that comes out of graduate schools. Right sentiment, wrong target. So Christians should not respond to the individuals who are caught up in this particular sinful pathology with cruel mockery or hatred or superiority. We all have our sins, but with gentleness, with kindness, with charity, and recognition that you are observing ultimately God's judgment on souls who will not turn to him. They can't erase his image in them, but they are destroying themselves in attempting to do so. Therefore, you cannot, if you are an Orthodox Christian, you cannot accommodate, accept, or celebrate in any fashion their attack on God through their attacks on themselves and their bodies. They cannot change their identity through their own desires and efforts, hormones, scalpels, TikTok videos, or anything else. But they can be changed, transformed. Because God is slow to anger, and he's full of mercy, and he's ready to forgive and cleanse and give them and any one of us a new identity, a real and true and eternal identity, a joyful identity in Jesus. That's it.